Here, this is for you.
Young lady, you didn't have to do that.
Keep your last $5, the cashier muttered. You'll need them more than he ever will. The words lingered in the chilly morning air like a challenge no one else seemed willing to answer. Outside a small neighborhood bakery on the edge of downtown Boston, people hurried past with steaming coffee cups in one hand and phones in the other, barely noticing the elderly man standing quietly beside the window. He never reached out his hand. He never asked for money. He simply looked at the fresh loaves displayed behind the glass with the kind of quiet longing that said more than any plea ever could. Maya Brooks noticed because she had learned long ago that the people hurting the most were usually the ones trying hardest not to be seen. At 24, Maya knew exactly what it felt like to count every dollar. She worked double shifts as a waitress at Hidden Table, a busy upscale restaurant where polished silverware sparkled brighter than the smiles many customers offered. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Rent, utilities, student loan payments she was still struggling to chip away at. And every Friday, she quietly sent part of what remained to help her younger brother, Jordan, stay in college 2 states away. That morning, after finishing an exhausting overnight shift, she reached into her apron pocket and counted exactly $5. $5. Enough for a bus ride home and nothing more. Her feet ached inside worn sneakers, and the cold January wind slipped through the sleeves of her thin jacket as she stepped toward the bakery, thinking only about getting home before another 12-hour shift began that evening. Then she saw him. The old man stood perfectly still, his gray coat faded from years of wear, his shoes clean but weathered, his silver hair neatly combed despite the freezing breeze. There was something oddly dignified about him. His shoulders remained straight. His eyes were calm, yet every few seconds they drifted back to a warm loaf resting on the shelf behind the bakery window. He smiled softly at it, almost as if greeting an old friend he could no longer afford to visit. Maya slowed her pace. Around her, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A train echoed somewhere overhead. Business professionals hurried toward glass office towers without breaking stride. A young couple laughed as they carried expensive breakfast sandwiches wrapped in crisp white paper. Hundreds of people passed within a few feet of the elderly man, but not one of them stopped. Not because they were cruel, because they never truly saw him. Invisible people existed everywhere if you were moving too fast. Maya understood that better than most. She had spent years balancing trays between tables where guests remembered the wine they ordered but forgot the name printed neatly on her uniform. She knew how easily someone could become part of the background. The old man finally turned away from the bakery window and quietly started walking. Not hurried, not defeated, just accepting. Something inside Maya refused to let him disappear into the crowd. "Sir," she called gently. He stopped and looked back with kind blue eyes that carried more gratitude than surprise. Maya glanced down at the wrinkled $5 bill resting in her hand. It represented a ride home, warm feet, and 40 minutes she desperately needed before sleeping. She smiled anyway. "Would you wait just 1 minute?" she asked. Before the old man could answer, she stepped inside the bakery. The rich aroma of fresh bread wrapped around her like a warm memory as she walked to the counter, placed her last $5 on the polished wood, and quietly said, "Could I please have the freshest loaf you have?" Before we continue, if you enjoy unforgettable stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments, subscribe to Hidden Table. Every story reminds us that true character is revealed through courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Now, let's see what happens next. The cashier carefully wrapped the warm loaf in brown paper and slid it across the counter with a puzzled look that lingered longer than necessary. Maya accepted it with both hands, thanked her quietly, and stepped back outside into the crisp morning air where the old man still waited exactly where she had left him. He had not paced. He had not looked impatient. He simply stood with his hands folded together, watching snowflakes drift across the sidewalk as though the entire city had slowed down for just a moment. Maya walked over and held out the loaf with an easy smile. "I hope you like sourdough," she said. The old man's eyes widened, not with excitement, but with genuine surprise. "Young lady," he said softly, "you did not have to do that." Maya shrugged as if it were the smallest decision in the world. Maybe not, she replied, but I wanted to. For a few seconds, he simply looked at the bread instead of taking it, almost afraid it might disappear if he reached too quickly. When his weathered hands finally accepted the package, he held it with remarkable care, as though it were something priceless instead of something that had cost only $5. Thank you, he whispered. It has been a long time since someone offered kindness before asking questions. Maya laughed gently. Bread tastes the same whether somebody knows your story or not. The old man smiled, and for the first time the lines across his face softened into something peaceful. What is your name? He asked. Maya Brooks. That is a beautiful name, he replied. Mine is William. He offered no last name, and Maya never asked. Around them, life continued without noticing the quiet exchange taking place beside the bakery. Cars rolled through green lights. Office workers hurried toward morning meetings. Delivery drivers unloaded boxes without looking up. It struck Maya how easily the most meaningful moments happened while everyone else was busy chasing something else. William carefully tore off a small piece of the warm bread and closed his eyes as he tasted it. Fresh, he said with a smile that carried the warmth of old memories. My wife used to buy bread every Saturday morning. She always insisted that fresh bread made every house feel like a home. Maya noticed the way his voice changed when he mentioned her. There was sadness there, but also gratitude. She did not pry. Some stories deserved to be shared only when the owner was ready. Instead, she pointed toward a nearby park bench where the morning sun had begun melting a thin layer of frost. You should sit somewhere warm while it is still fresh, she suggested. William nodded appreciatively. Before walking away, he paused and looked back at her with unusual curiosity. Tell me something honestly, Maya. Were those really your last $5? She blinked, surprised by the question. Then she smiled again, refusing to let regret enter the moment. Money comes back, she answered. Opportunities come back. Even difficult days pass. But if I had walked away pretending not to see you, I think that would have stayed with me much longer. William remained silent. His thoughtful blue eyes never left her face. It was as though he were measuring something far more valuable than words. Finally, he gave a slow nod. People spend entire lifetimes learning that lesson, he said quietly. You learned it while you were still young. Maya glanced at the time on her phone and realized she had already missed the bus she had planned to catch. Home was now nearly 2 hours away on foot. She slipped the phone back into her pocket without a trace of frustration. I should get going, she said cheerfully. Have a good day, William. As she turned and began walking through the cold city streets, she never noticed the black luxury sedan parked discreetly across the avenue, nor the driver inside who had been watching the entire conversation in complete silence, his hand already reaching for a phone after seeing something he never expected to witness that morning. The walk home stretched far longer than Maya had planned, but somehow it did not feel heavier. The cold air brushed against her face as she crossed neighborhood after neighborhood, passing brick apartment buildings, corner diners opening for lunch, and children laughing on a school playground. She thought briefly about the missed bus, then smiled to herself. $5 could buy another ride someday. Peace of mind was much harder to replace. By the time she reached her small apartment on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building, the winter sun had climbed high above the rooftops. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and fresh laundry, familiar enough to feel comforting despite its worn appearance. Maya quietly unlocked the door, careful not to wake her roommate, who had just finished working the overnight shift at a nearby hospital. Inside, everything reflected the simple rhythm of her life. A second-hand sofa, a tiny dining table with one uneven leg, a stack of textbooks that belonged to Jordan, waiting to be mailed after she finished highlighting several pages he needed for his business management course. Before allowing herself to rest, Maya opened her banking application. The balance stared back at her with uncomfortable honesty. It was lower than she hoped and higher than she feared. Rent would be due in less than a week. Her electric bill was waiting unopened on the kitchen counter. Jordan had texted the night before, apologizing for asking whether she could help him replace a broken laptop battery before midterm exams. Maya closed the application without sighing. Worry had never solved a single problem. Action usually did. She poured herself a glass of water, removed her shoes, and sat quietly by the apartment window as snow continued drifting over the city. Her phone buzzed. It was Jordan calling between classes. "Hey, big sister," he said with his usual cheerful voice. "Please tell me you finally got some sleep." Maya laughed softly. "Not yet. I took the scenic route home today." Jordan immediately recognized the familiar tone. "What happened?" Maya told him about the elderly man outside the bakery, leaving out only the part about using her last $5. She knew exactly how her younger brother would react if he learned she had walked nearly 7 miles through freezing weather instead of taking the bus. Jordan listened carefully before answering. "You always do things like that." "Like what?" Maya asked. "You help people before you calculate whether it makes sense." Maya leaned her head gently against the window. "Sometimes kindness makes sense later." Jordan became quiet for a moment before changing the subject to classes, professors, and an upcoming presentation. Maya listened proudly. Every late shift and every extra hour she worked felt worthwhile, hearing him talk about his future with hope instead of fear. After the call ended, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She set an alarm for 3 hours later before curling beneath a thin blanket on the couch. Outside, Boston continued moving at full speed while Maya slept through sirens in the distance, delivery trucks rattling over uneven streets, and neighbors coming and going in the hallway. Across the city, however, another conversation had just begun inside the back seat of the black luxury sedan. William Harrison sat quietly, the untouched loaf of bread resting beside him. Across from him, his longtime driver, Thomas Reynolds, glanced into the rearview mirror. They had worked together for almost 20 years, long enough for silence to carry its own language. "Sir," Thomas finally asked, "would you like me to return to headquarters?" William did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the loaf wrapped in plain brown paper, then toward the bakery growing smaller through the rear window. "Thomas," he said calmly, "how many people recognized me this week?" Thomas thought for only a second. "Hundreds." William nodded slowly. "And how many actually saw me this morning?" The driver understood the difference immediately. He smiled almost imperceptibly before replying. "Only one, sir." William gently rested his hand on the warm loaf and looked back toward the crowded city streets. "Find out everything you can about Maya Brooks," he said quietly. "Not because she helped me, because she helped someone she believed could offer her absolutely nothing in return." The next morning arrived with the quiet confidence of routine. Maya tied her apron, tucked a loose curl beneath her headband, and stepped onto the restaurant floor just before the breakfast crowd began to arrive. Hidden Table was already glowing beneath warm pendant lights, polished glass reflecting the soft golden sunrise pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. Fresh coffee filled the air, plates clinked gently in the kitchen, and conversations slowly replaced the silence that had settled over the dining room before opening. Maya greeted every customer exactly the same way she always had, with genuine warmth that never sounded rehearsed. She remembered regular guests by name, asked about a little girl's piano recital, congratulated an older couple on their anniversary, and quietly replaced a businessman's spilled coffee before he even had the chance to apologize. None of it felt extraordinary to her. It was simply the way she believed people deserved to be treated. Around mid-morning, her manager, Linda Foster, approached carrying a clipboard. "Maya," she said with a relieved smile, "thank you for covering another shift tomorrow evening. I know it is your only day off this week." Maya nodded without complaint. "Jordan has tuition coming up," she answered. "A few extra hours never hurt." Linda studied her for a moment. "You know, every time I offer someone overtime, they negotiate. You are the only one who thanks me first." Maya laughed softly. "Life negotiates enough for all of us." Linda smiled before walking away, quietly shaking her head with admiration. Several tables away, a middle-aged customer accidentally dropped his wallet beneath his chair while rushing to answer an important phone call outside. Maya noticed it immediately. She picked it up, saw several $100 bills inside, and without opening another pocket or checking a single identification card, hurried outside to return it. The customer looked genuinely surprised. "You could have kept this," he admitted while accepting the wallet. Maya simply smiled. "Then it would not have been mine anymore." He thanked her repeatedly before leaving, still amazed by how naturally she had done the right thing. Inside the restaurant, none of her co-workers seemed particularly surprised. They had watched Maya perform small acts of honesty almost every day. She stayed late when someone was sick. She quietly paid for meals when elderly customers realized they had forgotten their wallets. She slipped encouraging notes into takeout bags for exhausted nurses from the nearby hospital during overnight shifts. She never announced these moments. She rarely even remembered them afterward. Unknown to everyone inside Hidden Table, another pair of eyes had begun noticing them very carefully. Thomas Reynolds sat alone near the back corner of the dining room, wearing an ordinary navy jacket instead of his usual tailored suit. He ordered only black coffee and a simple breakfast, blending into the steady flow of customers without attracting attention. William Harrison had asked him for facts, not assumptions. So Thomas watched. He watched Maya greet every guest with equal respect regardless of whether they ordered pancakes or premium steak. He noticed that she listened without interrupting, smiled without pretending, and thanked every dishwasher before leaving the kitchen. Most importantly, he noticed something William had suspected the moment Maya bought that loaf of bread. Her kindness did not change depending on who was standing in front of her. It was consistent, quiet, unshakable. By the end of his meal, Thomas placed cash on the table along with a handwritten note. Maya found it only after clearing the dishes. The note contained just one sentence written in neat block letters. Please never allow the world to convince you that goodness goes unnoticed. She looked around the dining room, hoping to thank whoever had written it, but the customer was already gone. Maya folded the note carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket beside the pen she used every day. She smiled for only a second before returning to work, never realizing that somewhere across the city, William Harrison had just finished reading a detailed report that ended with one simple conclusion. Sir, Thomas had written, she behaves exactly the same when she believes nobody important is watching. William quietly closed the folder, looked out across the Boston skyline from his office window, and whispered almost to himself, then it is time for someone important to meet her properly. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories where the most overlooked people reveal the greatest strength, subscribe to Hidden Table. Here, every story reminds us that courage, integrity, and kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's see what happened next. William Harrison had spent more than 4 decades making decisions that moved markets, launched companies, and shaped thousands of careers. Yet the simplest report Thomas Reynolds had ever delivered was the one he read 3 times before quietly setting it aside. There were no impressive academic awards listed on the first page, no influential family connections, no remarkable financial achievements. Instead, there were small observations that most executives would have overlooked. Maya Brooks stayed after her shift to help a new dishwasher learn the evening routine without asking for overtime. She greeted the maintenance staff by name every morning. She quietly covered meals for customers who looked embarrassed when their credit cards failed. She returned lost belongings without expecting praise. William leaned back in his chair and looked across the glass walls of Harrison Global Headquarters as Boston shimmered beneath the pale winter sunlight. His office overlooked one of the busiest financial districts in the country, where ambition filled every sidewalk and every conversation seemed measured by profits, promotions, and quarterly results. For years, he had wondered whether genuine kindness still existed without an audience. Now he had his answer, wrapped in a simple report about a waitress who had no idea anyone was paying attention. Thomas entered the office carrying fresh coffee. You asked for everything we could verify, he said. Every employee we spoke with described her the same way. Different stories. Same character. William smiled faintly. That is much harder to fake than talent. Thomas nodded. Do you want me to contact her manager? William shook his head immediately. No. If people know an opportunity is coming, they often become different versions of themselves. I have already seen who she is when she believes nothing is waiting on the other side of a good deed. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, watching tiny figures crossing busy intersections several stories below. Do you know what surprises me the most, Thomas? What is that, sir? She never once tried to discover whether helping me would benefit her. She simply saw someone who needed help. Thomas smiled knowingly. That is becoming increasingly rare. William turned back toward his desk where the brown paper wrapping from the loaf of bread rested neatly folded inside a small wooden box. Most people would have thrown it away without another thought. He had kept it because sometimes the smallest gifts carried the greatest reminders. Schedule dinner at Hidden Table tomorrow evening, William said calmly. Reserve a table under my own name. Thomas raised an eyebrow. That will attract attention. Exactly, William replied. I want everyone to know who I am this time. Meanwhile, across the city, Maya hurried through another demanding afternoon. The lunch rush had finally slowed, giving the staff a brief chance to breathe before preparing for dinner service. She carried fresh linens into the storage room when Linda stepped inside, holding an envelope. Maya, this came for you. Maya looked puzzled. There was no return address, only her name written neatly across the front. She carefully opened it and discovered a handwritten card. Inside were just 2 sentences. Never doubt that quiet kindness travels farther than loud success. Keep being exactly who you are. There was no signature, no explanation. Maya smiled softly, recognizing neither the handwriting nor the sender. Someone must really appreciate you, Linda said. Maya tucked the card into her apron beside the earlier note from the mysterious customer. Or maybe someone just needed to remind themselves that kindness still matters. Linda laughed. You always find the hopeful explanation first. Maya shrugged with an easy smile. It makes the day a little lighter. As evening settled over Boston, the restaurant filled once again with conversations, candlelight, and the familiar rhythm of polished glasses meeting polished tables. Maya moved gracefully from guest to guest, completely unaware that less than 24 hours from now, the quiet stranger she believed she would never see again would walk through those front doors dressed not in a faded gray coat, but in an impeccably tailored navy suit, followed by executives, assistants, and photographers, carrying a name that every person in the room would recognize the instant it was spoken. The following evening, Hidden Table carried the unmistakable energy of an important night. Crystal glasses reflected the soft glow of chandeliers. Polished silverware lined every table with perfect precision, and quiet piano music drifted through the dining room as Boston's skyline shimmered beyond the restaurant's tall windows. Maya adjusted the sleeve of her uniform, tucked the 2 handwritten notes safely inside her apron pocket, and began greeting arriving guests with the same calm smile she offered everyone who walked through the door. She had no reason to believe this evening would be any different from the hundreds she had already worked. Just before 7 o'clock, Linda Foster hurried out from her office with an expression Maya had never seen before. Everyone, she called softly, trying not to alarm the guests already seated. We have a very important reservation arriving in less than 5 minutes. Harrison Global reserved the private dining room. Several employees exchanged surprised glances. One server whispered, as in William Harrison? Another nodded almost immediately after checking the reservation list. The William Harrison. Maya had heard the name before. Nearly everyone in Boston had. Harrison Global appeared in business magazines, scholarship programs, hospital donations, and headlines across the country. William Harrison was known as one of the most respected business leaders in America, a billionaire whose investments had transformed entire industries. Maya smiled politely while folding fresh linen napkins. To her, famous people still needed water, dinner, and simple kindness, just like everyone else. Outside, a line of dark vehicles rolled quietly toward the restaurant entrance. Valets straightened their jackets. The hostess took a slow breath. Even guests near the front windows paused their conversations as several well-dressed executives stepped onto the sidewalk. Then one final car stopped. The rear door opened. A distinguished gentleman emerged wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit beneath a charcoal wool overcoat. His silver hair was neatly combed. His posture was confident without arrogance. Cameras from a local business publication waiting across the street captured the moment as flashes briefly illuminated the entrance. Maya happened to glance toward the front doors while carrying a tray of sparkling water. Her steps slowed almost imperceptibly. Something about the man's face felt strangely familiar. Then he looked directly at her. The gentle smile was exactly the same. The calm blue eyes had not changed. Only the clothing had. Maya stopped completely. The tray remained perfectly balanced in her hands, but her heart suddenly raced with disbelief. It was William, the quiet elderly man who had stood outside the neighborhood bakery only 2 mornings earlier. Before she could process another thought, Linda hurried forward with several managers. Mr. Harrison, she said warmly, it is an honor to welcome you back to Hidden Table. William thanked her graciously, but instead of following the group toward the private dining room, he looked past everyone else until his eyes found Maya again. Good evening, Maya, he said with genuine warmth, as though greeting an old friend. Every conversation within earshot seemed to disappear at once. Several co-workers turned toward Maya in complete confusion. Linda blinked twice. "You know Mr. Harrison?" Maya struggled to find words. I only met him once." William smiled gently. "She is being modest." He took a few unhurried steps across the dining room, ignoring the curious stares surrounding him. 2 mornings ago, when everyone else walked past an old man outside a bakery, Maya stopped. The room became remarkably quiet. Even nearby guests lowered their voices as they sensed something meaningful unfolding. William continued calmly. She spent her last $5 so that a stranger she believed had nothing could enjoy fresh bread. Maya immediately shook her head, embarrassed by the attention. "Please, sir, it was only a loaf of bread." William's expression softened even more. "No, Maya." He looked around the dining room before speaking clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "It was never about the bread. It was about the fact that you saw value in a person long before you knew his name, his position, or the size of his bank account. In my experience, that is one of the rarest qualities a human being can possess." Around the restaurant, employees who had worked beside Maya for years suddenly understood why the mysterious notes had arrived, why strangers had quietly observed her, and why the most influential man in the room was standing before a young waitress with a gratitude that no amount of wealth could ever purchase. No one moved for several long seconds. The quiet inside hidden table felt almost sacred, as though every conversation, every clink of silverware, and every business discussion had willingly stepped aside to make room for something far more important. Maya stood frozen beside the service station, still holding the empty tray in her hands, searching William Harrison's face for the same gentle man who had smiled over a loaf of fresh bread only 2 mornings before. She finally found her voice. "You never told me who you really were." William smiled warmly. "Because I wanted to know whether it mattered." Maya lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking back at him. It did not. His smile widened. "I know." Around them, several executives exchanged thoughtful glances. They had spent years watching William negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions with remarkable precision, but very few had ever seen genuine emotion soften his expression the way it did now. Linda Foster stepped forward carefully, still trying to understand everything unfolding in front of her. "Mr. Harrison," she said respectfully, "if we had known you were coming, we would have prepared something much more special." William turned toward her with the same calm courtesy Maya had first experienced outside the bakery. "You already did," he answered. "You hired someone who still believes every person deserves dignity before they deserve recognition." The words settled gently over the room. Maya felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She had never been comfortable standing at the center of attention. To her, kindness had never been a performance. It was simply the easiest way to move through the world. William looked back at her. "Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you bought the bread?" Maya nodded slowly. "I said money comes back. Opportunities come back. But walking away from someone who needed help would stay with me much longer." William folded his hands together thoughtfully. "I have spent decades meeting remarkable people, brilliant engineers, extraordinary investors, visionary entrepreneurs. Yet I cannot remember the last time someone gave away something they could not easily afford without expecting anything in return." Maya shook her head gently. "It was only $5. William answered immediately. "No, Maya. It was transportation home after a long shift. It was warmth on one of the coldest mornings of the year. It was comfort that you willingly exchanged for someone else's dignity. Value is never measured only by numbers. It is measured by sacrifice." Several employees quietly lowered their eyes. Some had worked beside Maya for years without realizing how often she quietly chose other people over herself. Thomas Reynolds stepped forward carrying a small brown package. William accepted it before extending it toward Maya. She hesitated. "Please," William said softly. "Open it." Inside rested the neatly folded brown paper wrapper from the loaf of bread she had purchased. Maya looked up in confusion. "You kept this?" William nodded. "Every morning since my wife passed away, I have tried to remind myself that wealth can purchase comfort, influence, and opportunity, but it cannot purchase sincerity. When you handed me that loaf, you reminded me of something I was beginning to fear had disappeared from the world." His voice remained steady, but every word carried unmistakable gratitude. "I did not keep the paper because it wrapped bread. I kept it because it wrapped hope. Maya carefully held the folded paper as though it had become something unexpectedly precious. Around the dining room, even guests who knew nothing about business magazines or financial headlines understood they were witnessing something that money alone could never create. William looked around the room before speaking one final time. Most people recognized my face the moment I walked through these doors tonight. Maya recognized my humanity long before she recognized my name. Between those two things, only one has lasting value. As complete silence settled over the restaurant once again, it became impossible to tell who had inspired whom more deeply, the billionaire who had built an empire or the young waitress who had quietly reminded him what truly made a person rich. William looked at Maya with the quiet confidence of someone who had already made an important decision long before entering the restaurant. He carefully took the folded brown paper wrapper from her hands, placed it gently back inside the small wooden box, and closed the lid with deliberate care. "I did not come here tonight to repay a favor," he said. "Kindness is not a debt, and gratitude should never become a transaction." Maya listened silently, unsure where the conversation was leading. William continued, "If I simply handed you a check, I would be rewarding one generous moment. But what impressed me was not one moment. It was your character. Character deserves opportunity, not charity." Every eye in the dining room remained fixed on him. Even the servers waiting near the kitchen entrance had quietly stopped working for a moment, drawn into the sincerity of his words. William turned toward Thomas Reynolds, who handed him a slim leather portfolio. He opened it and removed a single document before extending it toward Maya. "Harrison Global has spent the last 15 years developing a leadership fellowship for people whose integrity is stronger than their resume," William explained. "Very few are invited. They are selected because they consistently choose the right thing when nobody important appears to be watching." Maya accepted the document carefully, reading the first page without fully understanding what she was holding. It outlined a 2-year executive development program that included full tuition for business courses, professional mentoring, paid leadership training, and guaranteed placement within Harrison Global upon successful completion. She looked up in disbelief. "Sir, I do not have a business degree." William smiled. "Not yet." She shook her head gently. "I have never managed a corporation." "Neither had I when I was your age," William replied. "Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot." Maya looked down at the offer once more before quietly asking, "Why me?" William answered without hesitation, "Because companies do not fail only from poor strategy. They fail when people stop caring about one another. Every balance sheet eventually reflects the character of those making the decisions. I can hire brilliant minds every day of the week. Finding someone whose first instinct is compassion is much more difficult." Linda Foster quietly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. She had watched Maya arrive early, leave late, cover shifts, and encourage coworkers for nearly 3 years. She had always believed Maya deserved a greater opportunity, but she had never imagined it would arrive this way. William was not finished. "Thomas also informed me that your younger brother is studying business management." Maya's expression changed immediately. "Jordan." William nodded. "His tuition will be fully funded through graduation by the Harrison Foundation, provided he continues working as hard as he already has. That is not a gift. It is an investment in someone who has already demonstrated determination." Maya's eyes filled with emotion, but she remained composed. I do not know how to thank you." William answered with the same gentle smile she remembered from outside the bakery. "You already have." He paused before adding, "When my wife was alive, she often reminded me that the greatest return on any investment was seeing another person discover what they were capable of becoming. You reminded me of her wisdom the moment you chose compassion over convenience." Around the restaurant, guests quietly applauded. It began with one table near the windows, then another, until warm applause spread naturally through the entire dining room. There was no spectacle, no grand announcement, only sincere appreciation for a moment built entirely upon ordinary kindness. Maya carefully closed the portfolio and looked directly at William. "If I accept this opportunity," she said softly, "I never want people to think I received it because I helped the right person." William nodded with obvious respect. "That is precisely why you deserve it. You never tried to help the right person. You simply helped the person. Everything else came afterward." In that moment, Every executive standing behind William understood the true purpose of the evening. The fellowship had not changed Maya's value. It had merely revealed it to the rest of the world. 6 months later, the first light of another Boston morning settled gently across the city, touching the glass towers of the financial district before finding its way to a familiar neighborhood bakery on a quiet corner. The line inside was already beginning to form when Maya Brooks stepped through the front door wearing a tailored navy business coat instead of a waitress uniform. Yet nothing about the way she greeted the cashier had changed. She still smiled first. She still remembered names. She still thanked every employee before leaving. She purchased 2 fresh loaves of sourdough, tucked them carefully into a paper bag, and walked toward the same bench where one simple decision had quietly redirected 2 lives. The bench looked exactly as it had months earlier, except now someone else sat there. An elderly woman wrapped in a knitted scarf stared thoughtfully toward the bakery window with the same quiet expression Maya had once noticed in another stranger. Without hesitation, Maya walked over and offered one of the warm loaves with the same gentle words she had spoken before. "I hope you like sourdough." The woman looked surprised, then smiled with grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means." Maya smiled back. "Maybe I do." She never mentioned Harrison Global. She never mentioned the leadership fellowship that had challenged and transformed her. She never mentioned the business courses she had completed, the executives she had learned from, or the office that now overlooked part of the Boston skyline. She simply wished the woman a peaceful morning and continued walking toward work. At Harrison Global, employees had quickly learned something unusual about their newest leadership fellow. Maya insisted on introducing herself to every security officer, every receptionist, every custodian, and every intern before learning the names of senior executives. She listened before speaking. She thanked people whose work often went unnoticed. When she attended strategy meetings, she asked how decisions would affect employees before asking how they would affect quarterly reports. Some executives admitted privately that her questions had changed the way entire departments approach leadership. William Harrison watched those changes with quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, as the two of them stood together overlooking the city from his office, he asked a question that had been waiting in his mind for months. "If you could go back to that cold morning outside the bakery and know exactly who I was, would you do anything differently?" Maya smiled without looking away from the skyline. "Yes," she answered honestly. William raised an eyebrow with playful curiosity. "Really?" She nodded. "I would have bought 2 loaves instead of 1. William laughed, the warm, genuine laugh of a man whose faith in people had been restored by something money could never purchase. "That," he said, "is exactly the answer I hoped you would give." A few weeks later, Jordan Brooks graduated with honors in business management. As he crossed the stage, he searched the audience until he found his sister sitting beside William Harrison. Neither of them applauded louder than the other because both understood the truth. Success had not begun with a scholarship, a fellowship, or a career opportunity. It had begun with a choice made when no reward seemed possible. Years passed, and Maya eventually became one of Harrison Global's youngest regional directors, but employees throughout the company remembered her for something far simpler than her title. Every Friday morning, before work began, fresh bread quietly appeared in the employee lounge with a handwritten note beside it that read, "Someone once reminded me that kindness is never wasted. Please take what you need, and if you meet someone who needs hope today, pass it forward." No one ever removed the note. William often said that his greatest investment had never been a company, a building, or a market strategy. It had been believing in someone who already believed in others. And perhaps that was the lesson waiting quietly behind everything that happened. Wealth can open doors. Influence can fill rooms. Success can earn applause. But only kindness has the power to recognize a person's worth before the world knows their name. Because in the end, the most valuable thing Maya Brooks ever gave away was never $5. It was the decision to see another human being when everyone else chose to look away.